Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the cannabis revolution happening across the United States. And believe me, this is a story about so much more than just a plant. It's about staggering amounts of money, a deeply troubled history, and a really tough fight for a fair future. So, let's start with a number that'll make your head spin. $72 billion. That is the projected size of the legal U.S. cannabis market by 2030. We're not talking about a small niche industry anymore. This is one of the fastest growing economic engines in the country, and it is changing absolutely everything. All right, so how did we get here and where is all this headed? First, we're going to look at that billion-dollar boom. Then we have to rewind and unpack its criminalized past. After that, we'll get into the very real economic ripple effects, talk about addressing the harms, and finally ask the big question: can we build a truly fair future out of all this? Okay, let's kick things off with the money, because the sheer scale of the legal cannabis industry right now is, well, it's just staggering. We are literally watching a black market transform into a major economic force right in front of our eyes. I mean, just think about this for a second. A little over a decade ago, recreational cannabis was illegal everywhere in the United States. Today, it's legal for adults in almost half the country. This tidal wave of legalization has created an industry so strong, it actually grew during a global pandemic. That's incredible. But you really can't understand this modern-day boom without looking at what came before it. This new legal market is, after all, built on the ashes of a century of prohibition, a prohibition with a history that is deeply, deeply racist. It's pretty wild to think about, but back in the early days of the US, cannabis wasn't just legal, it was a critical crop. I mean, you have George Washington himself telling farmers to grow as much hemp as possible. It was essential for things like rope, sails, you name it. So, how did we get from that to total prohibition? Well, this is where things take a really dark turn. In the early 20th century, guys like Harry Anslinger launched a campaign of pure fear, using this kind of outrageous racist propaganda to link cannabis with black people and jazz music, painting it as this evil, corrupting force. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about stoking public fear. It was a calculated political weapon. Decades later, one of Nixon's top advisors, John Ehrlichman, just came right out and admitted it. The war on drugs was never about drugs. He said it was a tool designed to let them go after their two biggest enemies, the anti-war left and black communities. And please, don't think this is just ancient history. The legacy of that targeted enforcement is still very much with us. Even today, with legalization spreading like wildfire, a black person is nearly 4 times more likely to get arrested for a cannabis offense than a white person, even though both groups use it at almost the exact same rate. Okay, so with that heavy history as our backdrop, what actually happens to a local economy when cannabis goes from illegal to legal? Well, the answers are probably not what you'd expect. A big study out of The Ohio State University found a really clear pattern. After a state legalizes recreational cannabis, there's a significant jump in employment growth. Bottom line, legal cannabis creates jobs. But it's not just about jobs. That same study found that housing rents also go up. It seems that people are treating legal cannabis like any other desirable amenity, like a good school district or a nice park, and they're willing to pay more to live somewhere they can have it. But here's the major catch. While jobs go up and rents go up, the study found that wages stay flat. So let's connect the dots. Your rent is higher, but your paycheck is the same. That means your actual purchasing power, your real income, goes down. It's a bizarre trade-off. People are, in effect, paying to live somewhere with legal cannabis access. Of course, this conversation is not all about the economy. Legalization brings up some very real and very serious public safety concerns, and probably the biggest one is what happens on our roads. Let's just take a look at some data from Minnesota. For DUI cases where a full drug screening is done, over half come back positive for cannabinoids. And you can see that number for blood tests has actually been creeping up. Now, this data immediately raises a huge, huge scientific and legal question. Does testing positive for cannabis actually prove that a driver was impaired at that specific moment? And the science on this is pretty clear. Not necessarily. See, unlike alcohol, THC, the stuff in cannabis that gets you high, can stay detectable in your system for days, sometimes even weeks, long after the effects have worn off. Our current tests can tell us if you've used recently, but they can't reliably prove you were impaired while driving. It's a massive challenge for law enforcement. And all of this brings us to what is maybe the biggest and most important question of all. For an industry that was literally born out of a racist war on drugs, how do you even begin to build a future that is truly fair and that actively repairs all that damage? The numbers here tell a pretty stark story. The very communities of color that were torn apart by prohibition are now almost completely shut out of the legal industry's profits. I mean, an incredible 81% of cannabis business owners are white. And Black entrepreneurs, they make up less than 2%. It's staggering. So the main idea to try and fix this is something called social equity. And the concept here isn't just about leveling the playing field. It's about actively trying to repair past harm by giving resources and a leg up to entrepreneurs from the communities that were hit the hardest by the war on drugs. So what does that look like in the real world? Well, in a state like Minnesota, for example, you might get priority for a license if you or a family member has a prior cannabis conviction, or if you're a veteran who is discharged over a cannabis offense, or even if you just happen to live in a neighborhood that was heavily targeted by police for enforcement. But here's the problem. Even with these state programs, there are these massive roadblocks at the federal level. Because cannabis is still illegal federally, businesses can't get bank accounts, which forces them into dangerous all-cash operations. They get hit with these insane tax rates. We're talking 70% or higher. And in the cruelest irony of all, the very same criminal record that might qualify you for help can also block you from getting a loan. So is there a way forward? Well, a lot of people are pointing to federal legislation, like the MORE Act. This would do a few huge things. It would finally end federal prohibition, it would create a fund from a sales tax to actually invest in repairing communities, and, this is key, it would automatically expunge federal cannabis records, wiping the slate clean for millions of people. And so, as this $72 billion green rush continues to barrel forward, this really is the ultimate question we're left with. It's not just about the freedom to use a plant anymore. It's about justice, and whether an industry born from so much injustice can ever create a truly equitable future, well, that remains to be seen.